Hey everybody! So today we're going to talk some more about the GC, the Galactic Center. We're going to be looking at numbers, percentages, things like that from the research, from the participants. Different things that I wanted to look at to just kind of see the percentage of how many people have something going on in their charts. Before I get started though, I want to throw out my disclaimer that I am in no way, shape, or form saying that I am an expert with the GC or anything like that. I do feel like at this point, I have a pretty somewhat decent idea of how the GC works and functions in a natal chart, what it kind of does. And it really is, it really is a wild card. But I have an idea, like when I see it in somebody's chart, at this point, I do kind of have a pretty good idea of how it will function and what it will do. A pretty good idea anyway. So while I'm not saying I'm an expert at this, I do feel like I have a decent handle on it, and just literally fucking with astrology here. So just want to throw that out there. And if you're more of a reader than a watcher, I do have a blog post about this. I'll put it in the description below. If you're watching this on YouTube, you should just be able to click the link. If you are watching this on Instagram, you might have to copy and paste or actually manually enter the link, because Instagram is weird with links. Okay. So to start, in the last video that I did about this, I went into Jupiter and Uranus aspects between the two in the natal chart. So I want to continue on from there. Just kind of to give you an idea of where we're starting. So I wanted to look at other Jupiter contacts in the natal chart of the participants, and these contacts don't necessarily have to, these aspects don't necessarily have to deal, they don't have to include the GC. For these Jupiter ones, I was just kind of wanting to see if Jupiter made any contacts to Chiron or to Saturn. So I looked to see about Jupiter and Chiron, what kind of aspects, how many people, what the percentage was of people that had aspects between the two. I came back with 66% of participants did have some aspect between Jupiter and Chiron. And the aspects that I was looking at, are the conjunction, the sextile, the trine, the opposition, the square, and the inconjunct. If I had opened that up wider to include minor aspects, more minor aspects, the percentage probably would have been higher. And in time, I probably will open it up to minor aspects, because it does seem like people have some of that going on with Jupiter and Chiron. Not sure the percentage yet, but in time, I probably will open it up wider for those aspects as well. So 66% of people had Jupiter making some kind of contact to Chiron. 34% had no aspects between Jupiter and Chiron. But again, when I say no aspects, that's just none of those major ones I was talking about. Then I wanted to look at Jupiter and Saturn contacts in the natal chart. So I came back with 57% of people have some kind of aspect between Jupiter and Saturn. Here I was again looking at the same aspects: the conjunction, the trine, the sextile, the inconjunct, the opposition, and the square. And that left 43% of participants didn't have any aspects between the two, any aspect between the two. And since all the participants so far, there are a couple people that have submitted their charts and they don't have something conjunct the GC. I did not include those people. In time, they will be included, but for the cohesiveness of this research, keeping it all kind of straight, everybody here that's part of these percentages will have a planet conjunct the GC, which is why I felt comfortable looking at aspects in the chart, even if they didn't make an aspect to the GC, especially in regards to Jupiter, since Jupiter is a planetary ruler of Sagittarius, which is where the GC falls. So this seemed like an appropriate exercise. Now, the next thing I did was I looked at Jupiter retrograde or Jupiter in the shadow period, being born under a shadow period, meaning the 2 weeks before Jupiter turns retrograde or the 2 weeks after Jupiter turns direct from being retrograde. I looked at, I included them too. Now, in previous tallies having to do with this, I included Mercury retrograde and Jupiter out of bounds and all that. I took all of that out for now. Just strictly looking at Jupiter retrograde and being born under a shadow period. The one thing I did include this time, though, was Jupiter making some type of a contact to the GC. Now, that could be a conjunction, that could be an opposition, that could be a square, even though I'm not sure what to do with the squares yet, not totally, since the super galactic center is square, the galactic center. But I did include the squares, and I also included the trines, since I think the trines are a way to bring things down to Earth. Those are the 4 aspects that I was looking at here for Jupiter to make some kind of contact with the GC. So I did include that too. Leaving out, again, the Mercury retrograde part and Jupiter out of bounds. I didn't look at that this time. When I came up with the percentage for that, I came up with 63% of people have either Jupiter retrograde, born during a shadow period, or their Jupiter makes some kind of opposition, conjunction, square, or trine to the GC. 63%. That leaves 37% of people not having Jupiter retrograde, not born during a shadow period, and the GC and Jupiter make no contacts. Make none of those aspects I was talking about before. As far as the Jupiter, the people that do have Jupiter retrograde, the 63% Jupiter retrograde or Jupiter making some contact with the GC. To break that down even further, 69% of people have had Jupiter retrograde or were born in during the shadow period. And then 31% had Jupiter involved with the GC in some way. Now, if you have Jupiter retrograde or were born under the shadow period of Jupiter retrograde, and you have Jupiter involved with the GC, you would be in the percentage of people, the 69%, the Jupiter retrograde or in the shadow period. That's where you would fall in that percentage. Just to make that clear. The next thing I looked at was, I looked at Chiron. I wanted to see how many people had Chiron retrograde and Chiron direct. This doesn't necessarily have to tie into the GC, just in general in their charts, because I do feel like there is a tie between Chiron and the GC, and the way there's an affinity there. And I came back with an even split. 50% of people have Chiron retrograde and 50% of people have Chiron direct. So there's that. Then I changed it a little bit and just wanted to look and see people that have Chiron involved with the Galactic Center in some way, meaning the conjunction, the square, the opposition, or the trine. Those were the 4 that I was looking at here. I came back with 54%. Chiron has something to do, makes one of those aspects to the GC and the planet conjunct the GC. 46% did not. Now, again, I'll say this: if I had included other aspects, the percentage of yeses would have been higher. Especially if I had included the quincunx here, it would have been higher, or the inconjunct. But I didn't feel called to include that one, so I didn't. I was just looking at the trine, the trine to the GC, the square to the GC, the opposition to the GC, or the conjunction. Next, I looked at out of bounds planets. They've been on my radar too. I came back with Let me see. Make sure I say this right. Okay, for out of balance planets, I came back with 72% of people having at least one out of balance planet. 28% had no out of balance planets. As far as the percentage of percentage per however many planets, for one planet, I got 48% of people had at least one planet out of bounds. 42% of people had 2 planets out of bounds, and 10% of people had 3 planets out of bounds. Nobody had more than 3 planets out of bounds. Nobody so far has had more than 3 planets out of bounds in this study. Okay, so then I also wanted to see how many people had out of bounds planets involved with the GC in some way, either conjunct the GC, opposite the GC, square the GC, or trine the GC. And I came back with 79% of people that have out of bounds planet have at least one out of bounds planet. 79% of people their out of bounds planet does make a contact, one of those aspects, with the GC. And in a lot of cases, it's the conjunction. A lot of cases, the planet conjunct the GC is also out of balance. I have noticed that. I don't know the percentage on that, but I did notice that did seem to be often the case, or opposite. But especially the conjunctions seem to be out of bounds. And then I came back with 21% of people not having the planet or planets that are out of bounds having anything to do with the GC. And in order to be included in the yeses here, if you had like 2 or 3 planets out of bounds, all I needed to see was one planet out of bounds and dealing with the GC axis, like I was talking about, making contact with the GC in one of the ways that I mentioned. Not all of the planets had to be out of bounds, or out of bounds and making contact with the GC to be a yes. And then the last thing I looked at were retrograde planets, because I do feel like retrograde energy, like out of bounds energy, has an affinity for the GC. It kind of acts as like an amplifier, if you will. Like, it doesn't just retrograde energy and out of bounds planets, they don't like tune you into the GC on their own. But if you already have GC contacts, like the conjunction or the opposition or whatever, I think that it can kind of amplify it. So amplify the GC's impact. So as far as I wanted to look first at retrograde heavy charts. What I consider a retrograde heavy chart are 3 or more planets in the chart retrograde, or the chart ruler is retrograde, or something like that. That's when I think of retrograde heavy charts. That's where my mind goes. So I wanted to see how many people had retrograde heavy charts, were inclined to participate in this research in the first place, I guess. I was curious. I came back with 60% of people having what I would consider to be a retrograde heavy chart in this research. 40% came back as no. Their chart ruler is not retrograde. They don't have 3 or more planets retrograde. But 60% would be considered retrograde heavy. Then I wanted to see about planets conjunct the GC. How many had planets retrograde? How many people had the planet that is retrograde conjunct the GC? I came back with 32% yes. The planet that's conjunct the GC is retrograde. 68% was no. I wanted to look at this because I do wonder about the retrograde motion when you're talking about a conjunction to the GC. The GC warps time and space. So I do wonder if a planet that's retrograde conjunct the GC might actually function in a more direct manner. It might turn it direct, or it could go the opposite way and really, really cause it to function retrograde. I'm still kind of on the fence about that one, but I'm looking at it. I'm thinking about it. Anyway, I'm going to get going. If you want to follow us on Instagram, you can find us at Let's Fuck With Astrology. I'm at Saturn Season Astrology on Instagram. Natalie is at Abaturno Astrology on Instagram. If you want to like or subscribe or whatever people do with videos on YouTube, you can search for us by searching for Let's Fuck With Astrology. If you're interested in the star cards, go to letsfuckwithastrology.com/star-cards. And if you do the Reddit thing, come join us on the subreddit Let's Fuck With Astrology. All right, I'll see y'all later.